Welcome back to Nick Lenz's Movie Review, episode 131. This one, I'm reviewing the final film of the second phase of the MCU. And here's the thing about this particular film. Now, I forgot to mention this. With this film, with the previous one, this one was supposed to end phase 2. But because Ant-Man was coming up, they're going to have this one start phase 3. And then I think that Feige must realize, though, yeah, I think it might be better for this film to end phase 3. Ant-Man! Yep, a film that my brother-in-law doesn't like very much, but I love it because I love Ant-Man. Now, this film has live action be a whole boatload of characters. Like, oh my gosh, like almost every appearance in this film basically makes their first ever live action appearance. Now, here's the thing. Now, they do have two characters who do reprise their roles in the previous movie. We do have the older version of Howard Stark, Iron Man 2, played by the same guy, John Starley, and Haley Atwell as Peggy Carter, though a older version of her, no, not much older. Now, they do establish the fact in this. Now, the film we have Scott Lang played by Paul Rudd, a guy who does some jokes rolling around the past few years, who apparently hasn't aged since the 1990s. Yeah, as for how the heck he looks so young, despite back being pushing 50, no one has any idea. His mentor, Hank Pym, is played by the awesome Michael Douglas. Yep. His strange daughter, Hope, is played by Evangeline Lilly. Yes, when I saw this particular film, this was the fourth film I've ever seen this woman in, because the only other films I've seen this woman in previously was in the Hobbit trilogy. That's not a joke. She was in the Hobbit trilogy before she did this film. Of course, now I think she's pushing 40. She looks really good for her age. We also see the live action debut of Cassie Lang. Also, Maggie, who is Scott Lang's ex-wife. And yes, she's married to a cop, like he is in the comics. And the cop is portrayed with a very similar attitude, but not over the top, like anti-hating Scott Lang, like he is in the comics. Mm-hmm. Yep. Cassie, of course, is played as adorable as always. And this is how kind of she was back in the 70s. Well, if you read like the early Ant-Man comics, basically that's how she was like this. And in case you're wondering how Scott Lang gets the suit, like does he do in the comics where he steals it? Oh yes, he steals it, but this time, now it was implied in the comics that Hank Pym hired him to steal the suit. This film, oh yes, it's definitely true. They actually adapted, pretty much from what I can tell, the Marvel premiere 47, 48. They actually loosely adapted that two-parter for this film, which is fine. We also see the live-action debut of Darren Cross. Yes. A man who is, oh my gosh, this man is so evil. This man is more evil than the freaking Kingpin. The man uses basically a very rip-off version of the Pym particles to kill somebody with it and wipe up their remains and shove it down the toilet. Yeah, that's how evil this guy is. And apparently he was somebody who was also somebody who was mentored under the tutelage of Hank Pym. Now, unlike in the comics, Hank Pym did not own a company in the comics. He was just a scientist who got his money from his second wife, Janet Van Dyne. Now, Janet Van Dyne is mentioned in this movie. They mention that she possibly died about 40 years, at least 50 years before the events of the film. Yeah, they'll explore what happened with her into the next one, which I do appreciate the fact they saved for this. Now, there is some minor controversy with this one. Yes, mostly behind the scenes stuff, like it was with Age of Ultron. Originally, this film was going to be directed by Edgar Wright. Yes, Edgar Wright was originally supposed to direct this film, but he left due to creative differences. Yeah, the film was actually started production development started back in 2006, and they didn't start production back until 2013, a year after the Avengers film came out. Yeah, eventually he's played by Peyton Royce, who directs, I believe he directs the following film as well. Yeah. And they do keep Edgar Wright on as a writer, because they do keep his humor in here, which I do appreciate that. I haven't seen much of Edgar Wright's work, but from what I heard, the guy is a very popular for a director. And he's known for basically having Simon Pegg in a lot of his movies. So this movie did not have Simon Pegg in it. Surprisingly, no. And as far as I can tell, aside from this film, I don't think that Paul Rudd has actually been in any other film that features Edgar Wright basically having a hand in it. The film kind of starts out back in the 80s, basically. Hank Pym basically is having meeting up with people from Shield at the Triskelion. Yes, making its second ever live action appearance in the movies. Though difference is this is actually an early version of the Triskelion. Basically, this is one under construction. The course thing was set back in the 80s, not in present day, where you see Howard Stark, you see Peggy Carter, who is a little bit older. I'd say at this point, probably in her 50s or 60s. I'd say by the time we show up in present day, she's probably in her 80s. Yep. hmm Yep. And in the case of this particular scene, basically, you have one guy who doesn't like Hank Pym very much. So like he basically mentioned his wife. So basically, Hank Pym walks in and basically bashes his head down a freaking desk, basically breaks his nose. The guy later basically was revealed to be a Hydra agent. Yes, a Hydra agent. Yep. And in case you're wondering, any other character who makes their first ever, like, they do have a few other people appearing here as, let's just say, first ever appearance for live action. Yeah. As far as I can tell, I don't think it's anybody else. They do mention Hydra in the movie. Oh, yes, Hydra. Now, Hank Pym is getting out of prison after. Now, in case you're wondering, like, is there a comic that explains why he went to prison? Yes, it's a prelude comic. It's a short. It's a digital first comic. Apparently, he got back at the company and was stealing people's retirement. So he stole back the money, and he went to prison for it, and that cost him his marriage to his wife, who divorced him when he was in prison. He got out. His cellmate started up, basically trying to set up a security business. Of course, this is more successful in the next film. Basically, become roommates with each other, and well, then of course he's hired by Vanessa to steal something. Of course, he ends up stealing the Ant-Man suit. Yep. And in case you're wondering what he looks in the cover, I mean the helmet looks pretty much the same like it does. Like you can think of. This is the suit. This is the final version of the suit. Mostly it's the same, and he does make some tweaks to it later. Eventually, he steals the suit, and then basically he tries to return it, and then eventually he's called arrested by the police, and he gets out thanks to Hank Pym. And well, it's revealed to be Hank Pym thanks to basically ants, and basically it's revealed that Hank was the one who hired him, and Hope was the one who called the cops on him. Yep, and it's also shown that Hope was in a relationship with Darren Cross, very loosely. It's never fully developed on this movie. Yep. And of course, well, they do mention why Hank doesn't wear the Ant-Man suit anymore. Apparently, the movie decided to adapt the problem he had in the comic books. Apparently, he suffered from a sort of a mental breakdown. We couldn't exactly mentally have the suit on him like the helmet anymore, so it really bothered him. But he had like a little earpiece so he could still control ants. But in the case of having the suit on, it does affect his head. Though it does basically, he does put on the suit next movie with a different suit anyways. Excuse me. Yeah. So that's pulled direct from the comic books, and well, they do mention like the whole thing about they have to steal this stuff. Basically, of course, I mentioned the Yellow Jacket suit. Yes, Yellow Jacket. And here's kind of thing about this. Now, in the case, there's one character named Lewis who appears in the movie. Yeah, original movie, who later appeared in the first issue of Astonishing Ant-Man. Non-speaking part. Yep. Yeah, but at least this guy inspired a comic-based character. But in the case of any other characters who appear in a movie, I mean, the movie itself is very self-contained. Unlike a lot of movies where basically a lot of the stuff is like high stakes, this movie is like very small stakes, just basically one company. Yeah, and basically this Hank Pym's crew teams up with, oh, basically Scott Lang's teams up with Hank Pym. Well, before they do the whole heist thing, and they do a first heist, they need to go to a former Stark facility, which when they go there, it's the New Avengers training facility that was shown off in Age of Ultron. Of course, this film takes place right after Age of Ultron. And who just happens to be home? The Falcon! Yep, making his third ever appearance in the movies. Yep. Yeah, third. Of course, after this, he would appear in the following film of the MCU that comes right after this one. Yep. And They have a brief fight, and eventually he gets defeated, and he talks to somebody, he's like, do me a favor, don't mention this fight to anybody, probably because he found it to be embarrassing. Eventually he does steal the little device they're after, and, oh yeah, and one point that Scott Lang wanted to contact the Avengers over what this guy was doing. He's like, no, don't want to do anything with Stark. Yeah, as for why he hates Tony Stark, it's never fully revealed at all why he hates him. This little thing is mentioned in Endgame, but from what I can tell from the movie, they do reference this basically as hatred toward Tony Stark, but it's never fully developed upon. Actually, no, they're not mentioned at first. I actually mentioned in Civil War, which I'll talk about in a future review. Eventually, they decided to basically combine forces, basically try to, well, break into the facility, steal the stuff, and basically evacuate the facility without killing anybody. Which is a pretty smart move. Basically, the company can recover from losing one building. Yeah, Hank Pym basically recovered perfectly fine. Yeah. Also, he lives in a pretty good looking house. Looks like a Victorian style home, which I think he definitely can afford because he's rich. Which he probably got that from his wife. Which they don't mention much about her in this movie at all. I mean, they reference her a few times. They get much more development for her in the next film. Yep. Oh yeah, in case you're wondering, there's no mention of the fact if Hank was married to a different woman named there's no mention of Maria Pym. Yeah, she's not mentioned in the film. Basically, he's only married once, Janet, and that was it. Despite the fact they had a complicated relationship over the years. Yeah, thanks to the very different writers how they wrote him. They break a facility, and then Darren Cross puts on the Yellow Jacket suit, which, like, okay, you have the main character puts on a suit, and you have the main villain puts on a suit, and they fight each other. Where is this basically pulled from? Let's see. Why, the first two Iron Man movies. Yep, the very first two. The difference is it's a different suit. Yeah, and they actually have in case you wonder, the Yellow Jacket suit looks completely different to how it's depicted in the comic. Like, oh my gosh, this suit is depicted to be so different. It is nothing like the way it is in the comics. I mean, he has the same color scheme, yellow and black. Appearance-wise, you can't really tell this thing really is the Yellow Jacket suit. Yeah. And who puts on a suit? Why, frickin' Darren Cross. And they have various fight, and of course the fight gets taken to Cassie Lang's bedroom, which they fight in this hilarious, like, train thing. You have Darren Cross get run over by a model train. So hilarious. Yeah, and eventually they start shooting at the place and makes it bigger, and then they get soft to another dimension. Eventually they have it where he shrinks down so tiny he goes to the microverse. I've heard a rumor someone said this is supposed to have Doctor Strange, which wouldn't come for 2 years. Yeah. But yeah, eventually he gets out. Though this particular scene does have a follow-up in the next Ant movie, Ant-Man and the Wasp. So at least gotta appreciate the fact it's in it for a sequel. And of course it comes out and of course, well, tells Cassie how much tells her that he's Ant-Man, and they get along perfectly fine. And of course they all celebrate, and eventually in their room, and he like have Hank him talking, and all of a sudden he opens the door and he sees his daughter making out with Scott. I'm like, okay, did Hope basically decide to develop feelings for him? Yeah, this comes completely out of the blue, and eventually this particular part of the relationship is further developed upon in the very next film. Yeah, it's kind of like though that this film has some setup like toward the end of the film for the following film, which I think is a pretty smart move for Peyton Royce to do. I think he kind of knew possibly because well all the Marvel movies tend to get sequels anyways, so he wants to plant some seeds for the sequel, which I think it's a brilliant stroke of genius on his part, and of course the Raiders part too, because that's one of the two things they do explore in the sequel: development of Scott and Hope's relationship, and the stuff with the microverse. Yeah, because oh yeah, and the stuff with the Wasp that's developed there too, which I at least appreciate for that. But as a standalone movie, the movie itself was really good and grossed a little $500 million. Yep. So next film suffered the same fate this film did. Coming after the Avengers movie. The difference is that next film has different style ending to it than this film does. Well, then the ending what happened in now, unlike with the uh, next film of this particular film series, the Secret Ant-Man and the Wasp, it does not take place during events of Infinity War. This film is basically take place after the events of Age of Ultron. Yeah, that's where this film takes place. Which makes sense because it came out like less than about 3 months. I think it was about 2 months after the film was released. We got this film. Yep, and after this film, we did not get another film again for quite a while. It wasn't until April of the following year we finally got another film with Civil War. Yep, this film was great. Give this film a 9 out of 10. Yep, and I think I covered pretty much mostly everything related to the film. Yeah, the whole thing with Hydra, that I kind of felt as though was kind of weird. Yeah, even like when I first saw the film, like really they throw in Hydra. My only guess is the reason why they have mention of Hydra in this movie, and this is my personal theory. Well, Hydra's still kind of around, so why not? Though my personal theory is that they threw it in there just so it could have a connection to the MCU. That's not a connection this film has. Like that and the Avengers Training Facility and the mention of Tony Stark. It has some loose. It's basically set in its own. It's basically, despite the fact it's still set in the MCU, it basically feels like its own standalone movie. This is set in a bigger universe. Yep. So not much to say about this movie, and that movie's of course really good. Okay. So yeah, that's it for this particular review. My next review coming tomorrow with a review of News Episode 7 Deadly Sins, all with New Chapter Manga, and of course I'm gonna review with I'm gonna move away from Phase 2 because this film, Ant-Man, that's the end of Phase 2. I'm gonna talk about two films that are based upon Frank Miller comic books. One, of course, directed by the guy who directed Watchmen. Yep, I'll talk about that in episode 132, and it's basically its sequel in episode 133. Okay, produce next few. Bye.